There we go. Ask the Podcast Coach for July 3rd, 2021.
Let's get ready to podcast.
There it is. It's that music that means, hey, it's Saturday. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I'm Dave Jackson from the schoolofpodcasting.com, and joining me right over there, coughing up a lung as we speak. Look at that. It's what happened to your remember you had a cough button for a while. That is the one. That's the one and only Jim Collison.
I still do. Greetings, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Happy 4th of July. I do have that cough button. I just was trying to sneak away. Did you hear me?
Yeah.
Dang it.
No, it was fine. It was just like I could see something is going on over there.
I was just trying to clear my throat before the morning. It's a long weekend and, the partying has begun. So let's just say, I'm clearing my throat.
Yeah. And if you're watching live, you can go to askthepodcastcoach.com/live and ask your question there in the chat room. If you want to just jump into the video, we'd be happy to have you. Go to askthepodcastcoach.com/join. And if you're listening on Clubhouse, just raise your hand and we bring one person up per stage. And if you're thirsty, well, if you're really nice, Jim might share just a little bit of that coffee there. And of course, that coffee is brought to you by our friend Mark over at podcastbranding.co. If you are looking for any kind of, you need a logo, you need, let's say a lead magnet, you need artwork for your podcast, or you just need a whole website, then you got to go over to podcastbranding.co. Mark is an award-winning graphic artist, and he's also a podcaster, which if you've never worked with somebody who isn't a podcaster, it's a huge plus in the Mark category when you're working with a podcaster, because he'll actually go over and listen to your show, look at your website, and make sure that everything works together. In fact, if you're like, well, I've already got an artwork and a website, you can hire Mark to come over and do kind of an audit of your whole brand and make sure that everything's working together, because when you get it all unified, it's really powerful when you have your brand going in the right way. So if you need any of that stuff, go over to podcastbranding.co.
Cappuccino, hold the phone. Take me home.
Jim, I think we're back to overthinking things.
I think so. I kind of agree with you.
I went out to the Facebook groups and was just seeing all sorts of things like, let me see if I can find one. Well, one was, it's things like, should I use Headliner, or there was another tool that was used. And I think it's always interesting, like which tool is best, not what should I use this tool for? Like, what's the best thing? What gets the most impact kind of thing? It's all about the tool. Somebody was asking about how, this is the one I was like, somebody even said, man, we're all thinking about the wrong things. And that is, we've talked here about seasons, how, really seasons were designed for those podcasts with 19 different people at the end that they list their name and things like that, because it takes them years to make an episode. And that doesn't mean you can't use seasons. We've talked here about taking a break, but somebody asked, like, how many episodes are in a season? And I thought to myself, do you think that somebody's going to go, oh, look, this new podcast about something that I would be interested in listening. Oh, wait, they have 9 episodes in a season. If it was 7, I'd listen, but I'm not listening to 9 episodes. I kind of go, really? This is what we're going to obsess over? Yeah. 9 or 10 episodes in a season? I was like,
Well, I think we see this when an industry is maturing, and you see a rush into it. You see a whole bunch of new services pop up. You see those services fighting for who's the whatever, and then it kind of matures out, right? And you land with 8 or 9 host providers. You land with 8 or 9 social media folks, right? You have it just kind of levels out. And then this is where I don't think Facebook is helpful at all.
Yeah.
When you're in this mature stage, because you see posts go in and people are like, what's the best host provider? By the way, this drives me nuts when they do this. Go. Yeah. I hate that. Go. Like, yeah. Come on. Like 1997 called. Like they went their AOL back. So you the industry matures, and then we're splitting hairs in between things, right? Where,
Yeah.
well, okay, this, that, oh, I like that. It really does, I think, come down to, at this point in the maturity cycle, it comes down to preference, kind of, or an experience that you had, because the bad players have really washed out for the most part. There's still some there, but for the most part, the bad players are gone. Everybody's fairly even, and it's just kind of figuring out, like, okay, what do you want to go with, right?
Yeah, exactly. Here's an example one. Okay, I need some advice, please, community. This was in I think this was in the podcast movement, and there were a lot of brand new podcasters there, which I thought was cool. It says, I need some advice, please. I'm just starting production on a recap, meaning they're going to watch a TV show. In the pod, there's a phrase that'll trigger some people. In the pod, we are going to be discussing recapping one episode of the TV show per month. In other words, 4 episodes. So every time there's a new episode of the TV, going to be 4 episodes of the podcast. Here's my question. When we release, how should we number them? Essentially, should we structure and number them as episodes in themselves, as parts of the episode per month? So A would be TV show episode 1, podcast episodes 1 through 4, podcast TV show episode number 2, 5 through 8, or should we go TV episode 1, podcast episode, part 1, part 2, part 3? And I was just like, what?
Yes, do something.
Yeah.
just go away.
I don't know.
Go and do your craft.
Yeah,
right.
I would for me to actually answer that question, I might just give it a number. And for the record, I'll be very happy someday when we quit talking about episode numbers, because it seems to be something that
it didn't matter in TV for the longest time. I
Right.
think from like 1960 to like till Friends. Like Friends was kind of the beginning of where, they started creatively titling the one where, and then, for Friends episodes, like they creatively titled them. You wanted to find them.
right.
But before that, like, let's go back to the 80s, Dave. Like the A-Team. Do you have any idea, any episode, like,
No.
any seasons? Do you have any idea how many seasons they had?
Night Court, nope.
Knight Rider. Like, what? Like, nobody cared, like, for the most part, right? And you would think even in TV, like, you would think like TV Guide. Remember those?
Right, yeah.
They would care.
Wow.
Right?
That's something I haven't thought about in a while.
Exactly. They didn't care. They didn't care season and episode. It was always there, and you could, IMDb kind of brought back this idea of seasons and episodes. Only in the modern internet space have we even cared about that. When we started binge watching seasons, that's when it kind of started to kind of kick back in. So it's funny that, for the longest time, nobody even knew what a season was. It was like, oh, the new fall season. That's the only time it ever got mentioned anywhere. The idea of season. You never knew what an episode number was. So, do what works for you. This is seasons and episodes is where I think those work better for the podcaster than they do for the audience. So you number them the way that works best for you, and then just move forward with it. I guarantee you, I shouldn't say that, but I don't think most people are caring or even looking, right?
No, do we know what season Pirate Shirt episode was in Seinfeld, or the Soup Nazi?
No.
Like,
what do we say? Soup Nazi.
Soup Nazi. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So
but I say that, and then I'm a hypocrite, because at
Right.
Gallup we do have a podcast that has seasons, and we reference the seasons a lot because each season focuses on a different idea. And so we'll say, oh, that's in season 5, or, oh, that's in season 4. So it's helpful to us to have the seasons there. The episodes are just the theme names themselves, so we don't even number them.
there you go.
I do number them on.
See,
the
that makes
side.
sense to me.
Yeah.
When you
need
call
works for us.
Colin, oh man, Dr.
Gray?
Colin Gray,
Gray.
yeah. They do the podcast host podcast. I think that's the name of it. And he does seasons, because in season 1, we're going to talk about podcast equipment. In season 2, we're going to talk about such and such. So
it's helpful to especially with your audience so my audience at Gallup, we're probably adding, oh, the potential of 3 or 4,000 new customers every single day, right?
Yeah.
So we have huge potential there. So I have this influx of new people all the time coming in saying, "Hey, how do I want to learn more about this? How do I do that?" And it's very, very helpful to say, oh, because we haven't broken out by seasons. It's helpful to say, oh, go to season 3, and then they're organized by theme name.
Yeah.
That works for us. Called to Coach, I have 8 seasons of that. I don't think I've ever referenced a season once because it doesn't matter. It's the Soup Nazi, right? It's
Right.
I go, oh, you want to go to the one with Alicia? She talked about this. That's where you want to go. So it just kind of depends. I think it kind of depends on the content.
Yeah. And I guess to me, if I have to come to a decision and it's something, especially somebody asked again about what's the length. And of course the answer is as long as it needs to be. But I always just picture like when they ask the question, I'm like, well, let's put that in front of your listener. And like you just mentioned a great example, when you organize these things for the one show, that makes total sense. But sometimes I'm like, if you put yourself in the shoes of the listener, do they care? And like, or is it made to do a certain thing? So yeah, I just sometimes think we're just overthinking things just a touch.
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Jason Bryan asked, is there no Spreaker? I've been using, if you want to hear like pre-show stuff now, I've been firing up Clubhouse a little sooner. If I do Spreaker, that means I have another laptop here. And it dawned on me, Jason, that it was you and Daniel. Not that you and Daniel are not important, but I was just like, it's in the car, or I got to go get the table, things of that nature. I did see where Diane has a comment here. She says, I'm falling out of love with Zencaster. Not the first time I've heard that, by the way. Too many glitches, pixelization, freezing, blah, blah, blah. Screw it. We're going back. I don't know if I'd go back to Zoom. I would
StreamYard for the win on that one.
Yes, StreamYard.
Yeah.
I want to try Riverside.fm. I've had so many people tell me that it's good, and I tried it when it was fresh out of beta. Did not have a good experience, but it's also cheaper than my favorite option for interviews, at least, if I'm just not streaming, is Squadcast.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed that it's cheaper than Squadcast. And that doesn't mean I'm leaving Squadcast, but you know me, I like to make informed decisions. So next time I get a slew of interviews lined up, I might have to give that. So let's see here. Jim, although they weren't publicized much, Star Trek was a notable exception.
Correct.
Just about every TV show, as far as back as they were, had titles. Yeah.
Yeah, but they didn't this didn't happen until the Next Generation. And so because they needed to differentiate between the original series and Next Generation, and then there's been like 7,000 Star Trek versions since then. So it's important to separate those in there. But you're right. It was Star Trek was an exception on that for sure.
Yeah, and let's
Watched
see.
a lot of Next Generation, by the
way. I was tortured as a child. When I hear Star Trek, I kind of twitch a little bit because it was Star Trek followed by Hee Haw or vice versa.
Oh,
and we had to watch. That was like one of my dad's favorite things. And then my sister will still, if it's Star Trek, she's watching it. So I've seen The Trouble with Tribbles no less than like 15 times.
It's a good one. That's a good one. By the way, Trouble with Tribbles, and then there's a Deep Space Nine. That's another one of those 1,000 versions. Deep Space Nine goes back and does a version of it where they splice together. Talk about reusing content.
Oh, interesting.
They splice together the old footage from the 60s and then add in the new characters from Deep Space Nine. So they go back in time to be inserted into that episode. It's super cool. So if you should watch both. If you're a Star Trek fan, you need to watch Trouble with Tribbles from the original series and then go to Deep Space Nine. They did a really nice job on it. But it's a great way of thinking about how we reuse our content, right? Like this was a show that had been done 40 years ago. So it's pretty cool.
Interesting. Dave says, if you're doing multiple shows per TV shows, you're going to confuse your audience. Would it be better to do a longer show? There's a novel idea right there. Yeah. I've
maybe not.
I did have a guy once on the podcast review show that did a review of a movie, and the review was actually longer than the movie. We're just like, look, the movie was 90 minutes long. Your episode is 200, and like, it was crazy. So
Well, it kind of depends, I think, on how you think your audience is consuming those. I mean, if it's a weekly and you've got folks who are only going to tolerate 30 minutes, then yeah, you might want to break it up and spread that out a little bit. I've mentioned this before. My daughter, listens to this Critical Role podcast, and they're 4 or 5 hours, and she didn't even bat an eye. Dave, she stays up on Thursday. Like, she looks forward to this. Thank goodness when she's in college, no classes on Friday for her in most cases. Because this thing would start at 9 p.m. Central, and it would, they'd go 4 hours. It was ending at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And she didn't even bat it. There was no complaining. It's too long. For her, she wanted more. They did their season finale was 6 hours or something like that. And she's like, I'm going to have to split it up. That's just too long.
Well, speaking of too long, Uncle Marv says, I just got told the other day by another podcast. See, that my show was too long. That's where I go, like, is that other podcast your target audience? Because that's who I want to listen to. I think I've been doing it twice as long and I have twice as many listeners. Yeah. So that's so many people. I mean, in the early, like way back in the day, kind of 2005-ish, some study came out, said the average work commute was 20 minutes. And everybody said, that's it. We're all doing 20-minute podcasts. And it was like, I did that. And then I went to my first event and I'm like, what would you change about the show? My audience went, it's too short. And I was like, but the study says, no.
But the study.
Yeah.
This is the gospel. No, it's not. And I got the chance to hang out with Uncle Marv on his show a couple weeks ago. Had just a ton of fun doing it. I didn't think it was too long. In fact, I thought it was too short. Like I think, we got to the point, we talked through it. It was fun. I did, Dave, I did a 45-minute episode. Normally we're 90 minutes on Home Gadget Geeks, and I did a 45-minute this week. So it'll be interesting to see if I get any feedback on the short show. I might have some folks go, dude, like, where's the 90 minutes?
Right.
Like, that's what I subscribed for. So I think I go with, we say this all the time, go with the exact amount of content that you have. When you run out of content, stop. Right? Don't worry about the time.
And start with what you got. I see so many people, they're like, oh, I just need to do this. I know that and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, look, last night I started recording. I put a thing on Facebook and I said, you can always find a reason to not do something. Because I was like, look, I've been getting ready to kind of redo the School of Podcasting. And then it dawned on me that I right now am somewhere between 40 and 50 pounds. Because I love Facebook when they go, here's what you did 4 years ago. And I was like, wow, my face was half the size of it is. Because I'm much heavier than I was 4 years ago. So that could be a reason. Yesterday I went to record and I'd kind of been outside. My hair was a little frizzy. You can always find a reason to not do something. And I'm like, do it anyway. So, let's see. Diane has another point
or don't feel guilty about it.
Yeah. It's like, you got to start someplace.
Yeah.
Diane says, I knew who the guests were before Marv said their name just by the cryptic intro.
Merv Griffin, by the way. Merv Griffin.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, Merv Griffin.
Ooh. Yeah. That's not even close, but when I hear the word Merv Griffin, all I remember is Merv going, ooh. It's like, wow.
Wasn't he the guy who'd run around the audience with a microphone? Was that him?
No, that was Is the Caller There? White hair, Phil Donahue.
Oh, that's Phil Donahue.
Merv Griffin was a singer guy who went on to invent Wheel of Fortune and a couple other things, but he was kind of the Mike Douglas. We are really dusting off the 70s today.
Oh, wow.
Mike Douglas. I always loved when they took, because Mike Douglas was a guy from, I think, Cincinnati, if I remember right. I forget where he's from, and he was trying to be cool. So he had like John Lennon and Yoko Ono. And it's like, on the Mike Douglas show? Like, really?
Yeah.
Anyway.
That goes back into the old, I mean, that's kind of podcasting before podcasting, right? In the sense of the interview show, those kinds of, even some of the variety shows were. Well,
and here's the thing, Dick Cavett, and I only know this because I've been watching, I like to watch like history of like TV and radio and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And Dick Cavett was a guy that was having, kind of counterculture people. I remember when he had Muhammad Ali on, and Muhammad Ali was not towing the line on what the mainstream media was saying. And Dick Cavett loved it. His whole thing was like, hey, let's let's stick it to the man. And that's one of the things I loved about the early days of podcasting, especially. Coach Dave says, Ask the Podcast Coach has become that look forward to show to set the mood for Saturdays. No pressure, Jim. We're setting the mood.
I'm good with it. Thanks.
Not much podcasting specific content I have not seen or heard before, but the vibe is a weekly boost. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, what is there? Seriously, there isn't that much new to talk about. I think our goal is really just to encourage you to keep doing what you do and talk about what everybody else is talking about. It's, we're just, again, the industry, there's not that much new stuff to it. It's not like, 2006 or 7 when people were still going like, okay, what's podcast? And RSS, this idea of an RSS feed was pretty novel. And, there's a handful of players out there and, there's just a handful of apps and monetization was looked down upon. And
geez.
Right. And so we're kind of, I don't know if there's that much new. Apple's screwing up all the time. That's kind of new.
They just came out with a new thing. I can't wait for when I come back to work on Monday is, let me see if I can find the link. Apple announced, so further, kudos. Thank you for coming out and admitting that you did a boo-boo, but they have, I'm trying to find the link here. They basically said your downloads are going to go down because we hit a snag. Let me see if I can get this link here. It says,
so they're reporting too many right now and they're going to give it a haircut. Is that what they're saying?
Listeners on iOS 14.6 may experience an issue that prevents automatic downloads for new episodes. So, which might be a good thing. I don't know. From completing in the background. Although listening is unaffected, this issue can reduce downloads reported by third-party hosting providers and will be resolved with a software update. That's the bad news, and the good news is. The good news is, hey, we're letting you know there's something wrong. The bad news is, we'll get to it, which also includes enhancements to library in this coming week. So I was like, well, at least they didn't leave us out in the dark. They let us know that, hey, when your downloads take a dive, and the problem is I wouldn't have known about that. Except, my boss at Libsyn was like, hey, everybody, brace yourself. Things are going to get ugly when people go, hey, what the heck is going on? I lost 40% of my audience. So that's going to be...
like you never had it.
Right.
It wasn't there, actually. Yeah.
Here we go. Who is the avatar for this show?
For Ask the Podcast Coach, right?
Yeah.
Code 3 Podcast is asking, I don't know, Dave, what do you think? When you think about who we're talking to, what do you think of?
I don't think about who. I think about what I'm doing, and what is this show? This show is for the person that goes, hey, I'd like to hire you for some one-on-one consulting. And I go, okay, here, go to schoolofpodcasting.com/schedule. And they go, ooh. And I go, well, if you get up at 10:30 on Saturday, you can get as much free consulting as you want. So this is my answer for, I want one-on-one consulting. And I'm like, here you go, 10:30. All you got to do. We had Crystal. Was it Crystal? Come on a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. That was a great time. She was starting off, wanted to know what to look for in a co-host and things like that. That was awesome. And so to me, that's why I started the show. I love it, but this show was started as I wanted to play with Blog Talk Radio. And I did, and was like, wow, this is horrible. Jim came in and saved me because I was doing it solo. And then it was like, well, now it's fun. And then we looked up and we're like, holy cow, people are actually listening to this thing. Because I was going to shut it down. I was like, all right, it's been a couple months. I understand Blog Talk Radio is awful. And people were like, well, don't quit. Like, we're here. Like, and that's where people started saying, you're the new Saturday morning cartoons. But, because some of us could say we're kind of like the new media show and Podland where we're talking about the news, but we're kind of not. Like Art19 got bought by Amazon. Could care less.
Well, if it mattered.
Yeah.
I don't know if that matters. I guess it would matter to some. I guess. I don't know. We can't cover everything, right? I listen, every once in a while we get a good shot at someone in that avatar, right? Who's looking for some advice, who's, maybe kind of new to the space, those kinds of pieces. Most of the time, we're here to kind of entertain and have fun. I love hanging out with you. Listen, I wouldn't keep showing up. I wouldn't give up my Saturday mornings if I didn't have a good time doing it.
Let's not forget, Jim is getting up at 7 to do the show. Okay.
So but but the audience, like my avatar is our current audience. That's who I think about, the regulars that come out every single week and ask us great questions. And we get an opportunity to just kind of hang out with you. And it's fun. You get to put
Yeah.
your stuff in chat. We get to talk about it. That's my avatar, right? My avatar for this is just someone who wants to come and kind of talk about podcasting and have a good time and get a little snarky every once in a while. It's kind
Yeah.
of fun too. That's kind of
We're getting more Jim Harold, king of all things ghosty and spooky and things of that nature. Find him at jimharold.com. Yeah, there you go. It says Mike Douglas was originally broadcast from Cleveland. There we go. Then moved the broadcast to Philly. I'm not only a podcasting nerd, but a broadcasting nerd. Yes. Jim's,
it.
yeah. So, and then, wait, I missed one in here. Gabrielle said, why is Blog Talk Radio so bad?
Is it still a thing?
Yeah, it sounds like the phone, and in today's world, that just isn't going to cut
They
it.
still haven't upgraded anything. I haven't been over to Blog Talk Radio.
I haven't
I used
been-
to feed into that just because, right? But I quit.
I know a very drunk Andy Toe came to me at Podcast Movement because I have a post that still gets a lot of traffic on my website, 12 reasons not to use Blog Talk Radio. And they had tried to do kind of like a StreamYard thing, like connect everybody over the internet. And he was like, man, it's science. It's just, we're dropping packets. There's nothing you can do with and I was like, other people are doing it. And he's like, it can't be done, man. It's science. And I was like, and he's like, can you please take that post down? I was like, it drives a lot of traffic to my website. I'm sorry. I love you, buddy, but no. So I don't know if you can connect via a computer there now or not. They got bought by Spreaker, and that's the last I kind of heard of. It's kind of like TalkShoe. You're like, wait, they're still around, kind of thing. So
Man, we used to hammer on them all the time.
Yeah, well, because
their site looks better.
Yeah, they were kind of like Anchor before Anchor. They're like, it was just like, wait, what? Why are you using them? So let's see. Diane also asks, is it weird that the Chartable podcast is in Podfade? Chartable had a podcast? I don't know. I mean, some people jump in. Well, let me find my one question. Somebody had, I'm looking to set a goal. I didn't get the person's name. I'm looking to set a goal for my first podcast episode listenership. One of my best to base that off of. And my answer to that was, so he's kind of asking, he or she, they were kind of asking, hey, on my first episode, what should I expect? And my answer was, instead of looking at downloads, how about we celebrate the fact that you actually published an episode? Because there are a ton of people. I'm trying to, maybe we can talk about this on the other side of the awesome supporters, but I'm trying to, and I don't think there is, in the same way that there's not a giant golden switch that you flip up and you get 10,000 downloads. I don't know that there's something that if I just said this to one person, they would like imposter syndrome and overthinking, which I'm starting to find out is kind of part of imposter syndrome in a way, would go away. I don't know that there's a magic thing that I can look at them and say, evil demons come out and now podcast, and it's just like, ugh. So, yeah, I would, if somebody, because it's your first show, do you have an audience or not? How niche is it? There's no way to predict that. So I would just say, celebrate the fact that you now have something to improve. You can't improve what doesn't exist. And so
at Gallup, I don't give the hosts stats until they've done 5. Like, no,
that's a good way.
Not gonna. It's just not worth it. It's like, let's you get 5 and I'll give you some numbers. And that's kind of worked in my favor. I have a brand new one launching in Chinese this.
Wow.
As soon as I get it done, I'm waiting for some approval for some wording. It's actually, okay, Dave, I actually launched it without a launch. I know.
What?
I know.
What?
I know.
You didn't have a launch?
We didn't have a launch party. We didn't try to create. I needed to get it out there for some folks too. They could see it so they could give me some input on some things. And so we quietly just launched it. Like, it's out there. It's no fanfare, no. And I've got 2 I have 2 of those things done, and we'll have a third coming up here pretty quick. And I think before we make a big deal about it, I want to get probably 3 out there, not in the can, actually out there. Then when people show up, like, oh, you got 3 of these, okay, like this is something that's happening. So,
Nice.
yeah, a launch with no launch party. Imagine
That's it.
that.
Mark is telling Jeff Walker.
I know. I think of those differently. A lot of people want to do this big burst, get as many people as they can. I think Paul Colgan's in this category too. He's a big fan of that. Get those. And I'm more of a, let's get a bunch of these done. Let's get good at it, because the early ones are just terrible anyways. Let's get good at it, and then let's start advertising once we've got a bunch, like we have a bunch of things for people to consume.
That's it.
Rather, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, I've always said the people that are, and there's nothing wrong with having a big launch, for the record. I mean, it makes sense. But to me, I've always said, if a big launch equaled podcasting success, that's like saying a big wedding would equal wedding bliss. And I'm like, and in both cases, the work has just started.
Chapter in a book for you or something. That thing will preach, Dave. That's some good. You know what else is good? You know what is also good? You know who
is really good?
Is
My
good?
awesome support. And
are we ready?
We have news as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm not ready. You're gonna have to do your own coffee pour sound effects. So we always like to thank
good.
It does. It sounds realistic. And so we always like to thank James over at the Dog Podcast Network. He's the teacher's pet. And if you haven't checked it out yet, go over to Dog Podcast Network, especially if you like your little 4-legged furry friends. He's got short shows, long shows. He's got new shows. He's also got a contest running where you can win up to $5,000, especially if you're a podcaster and you have cool stories that happen to be about dogs. Check him out over at Dog Podcast Network. But we also have, that's right, a new no, sounds like news. Okay, we have a new patron.
Spaceship or something.
Yeah. This is James Rose. James has come on about he is asking about what kind of laptop to get and things like that. The Bros and Blokes. James also is a member of the School of Podcasting, but he let me know, hey, he's going to kind of back off a little bit on some of his podcasting things. Do you want to guess, Jim, what happened to James?
He had a child.
He had a child. That's it. And he has I wanted to share the picture, but I don't think without his permission, but this adorable picture of this little guy just sleeping on daddy was like very heartwarming. So James,
adorable.
Yeah. So James, thank you for being a new $10 patron. We deeply appreciate it. You can check him out over at brosandblokes.com. And if you look at the artwork, it says the Bros and Blokes Lifestyle Academy. And it's, James is from somewhere in Europe. I'm guessing England-ish. He's got that whole...
just say the UK. I think that covers.
Yeah, there we go. And then his buddy is in the US, and hence they kind of compare their different lifestyles and different words and all that other fun things. Check it out, brosandblokes.com. Thanks again, James, for being an awesome supporter. Our $20 supporters, we have awesome people like Ed Sullivan over at soniccupcake.com. So if you need some help making your stuff sound good, Ed can help you with that. Felix over at the Latin Podcast Awards. It's dedicated to enhancing the visibility of Latinx podcasts around the world since 2017. Check that out at LatinPodcastAwards.com. Glenn the Geek Hebert over at HorseRadioNetwork.com. I think Glenn is now officially out on the road.
He said the 29th of June, I think is what he said, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
So he's
be safe out there, Glenn.
Yeah, absolutely. Max Trescott up in the air. Boy, that Max could do a serious tour, if you think about it, because he's a pilot. He's got aviationnewstalk.com. So if he ever wanted to fly around the United States or whatever to do a tour, he could do that. Michael Delaney over at Baby Mountain Radio Productions, where podcasting and hard work are made fun. Michael left me a note because I've been using OBS with a DSLR camera, and Michael is like, dude, OBS is like, you will pry that from my cold dead hands. Brock over at Occupied Podcast. If you're into occupational therapy, he's got all things going on the Occupied Podcast. Find it at occupiedpodcast.com. Kim Craggy over at Toastmasters 101. If you want to develop your voice, reduce your editing time, or improve your content, Toastmasters101.net. Greg over at debtshepherd.com, where he is teaching financial wellness. Again, debtshepherd.com. Shane at spybrary.com. If you're into bond, what's another famous spy?
That's a good question.
That's a good one, isn't it? Now, see, Shane would know. And if you know the answer to that question, then you're the kind of person that should be listening at spybrary.com. Greg over at indiedropin.com. If you've got true crime or a comedy or a scary kind of story, go over to Indie Drop-In Network. You can find that at indiedropin.com. And he's got an audience waiting for your stuff. If you'd like to be an awesome supporter or to see our $10 supporters, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/store. You can be an awesome supporter. You can make a one-time donation. You can buy my book, Profit from Your Podcast. You can sponsor Jim's mug. It's all there. askthepodcastcoach.com/store. So,
Dave, I think we keep messing this. For some reason, we want to put Glenn on the road earlier than we keep thinking he's already done. And I think I'm sharing my screen for him. I think this will be a good, if you're ever going to do something around this around your podcast, I think look at what Glenn is doing, because he's doing a great job. So it looks like they leave July 31st through September 3rd. So we keep trying to get him out there a little too early. But I think if you were ever thinking, and by the way, I don't think this is a bad idea right now. I mean, I think I am getting on my Facebook feed, all my friends are now like, I got to go outside, like kind of, you know, I'm at a concert or I'm at a wedding, right? I think there's some appetite for those kinds of events. Some of my classmates from high school, we just did a 35-year reunion last night out in San Jose, and they all got together, you know, they have no masks. They were having a good time. You know, I think there's an appetite for some of those local kind of meetup type things again. So this may be an area in podcasting where you tried it maybe pre-pandemic and it just didn't work for you. Might be worth re-looking at here in the coming. There's, you know, like it's harder right now in Australia. They're locked back down again in some of their regions and such. But it may be time to start thinking about getting on the road or doing some in-person events again. Being early on that too, before people get too busy.
Exactly. Yeah. Kind of going back to the theme of overthinking thing, this was another question I saw. Does anyone have tips on formatting a beginner podcast layout? I'm trying to manage this to be short and sweet. So there's a key there, short and sweet. I may do a series, of course, and ask questions, but mainly it's me doing it solo. So there's an intro, then there's a topic, and then there's an outro, which is the call to action. And right now, that's all I have.
That's all you need.
That's it. I was like, it's called a sandwich. There's an intro, an outro, and some stuff in the middle. I'm like, don't overthink it. But this is where Jim has a point about sometimes Facebook is not, that poor guy got so many answers on, oh, you need to do segments and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, look, he said short and sweet. Like, hey, welcome to the show where we blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. Today we're going to talk about something, something, something. Mm-hmm. Here it is, something, something, something. Thank you so much for listening. Our website is blah, blah, blah. I'm like, don't overthink it. I was like, holy cow.
Yeah.
And then another fun question was, and I thought this was, how can I tell? This actually came from Quora. I was kind of getting not much from Facebook. So I went out to Quora. How can I tell if a podcast idea will be profitable?
Oh, I don't think you won't know till you do it to
right.
begin with, right? You actually have to do it. You know, this is where I think the principles of being an entrepreneur and podcasting really come together. And so what would an entrepreneur do with an idea? Do we know if this is going to be profitable? And so I think you can follow some of those same steps, right? Put out an MVP or put out a product to see what kind of response you get. Do some live streams around it. You know, this is like an area where LinkedIn would be helpful now, especially if it's kind of business related. Do a couple LinkedIn lives, right? Get out there and see what kind of response you get. How do people respond to it? What kind of feedback do you get? So I think sometimes people are expecting like, oh, I'm going to do a podcast about Matchbox cars. Like, will that be profitable? I don't know. Oh, how good are you? You know,
That's it.
did I ever think in a million years that a podcast about D&D could raise millions of dollars, right? When I was, I was playing D&D when I was 16 in the 80s. Did I ever think that thing was going to be a juggernaut for a pod? Not in a million. Now, there's another 100 D&D podcasts that aren't doing as well as Critical Role, right? And why does Critical Role work? Because they're committed to their craft. Like they are
That's it.
seriously committed to what they do.
That's it. Kevin in the chat room has a question. Does a cloud lifter change the sound of a podcast drastically? I have a cloud lifter. I actually like the Fethead better because I don't have to have another cable. But how does it change the sound of the mic? It doesn't. All it does is it makes it louder. And it's not because I could go here on the Rodecaster and really boost up the volume. And when you have something that's not well made, when you boost up the volume, you also boost up the hiss. With the cloud lifter, with a Fethead, it is 20 decibels, which is a lot of gain with no hiss. And I've seen this work great. And it's great for things like a high LPR40, the SM7B. Those are kind of gain hungry microphones. What I've seen, which I think is horrible, is I've seen people put that on their microphone and then say, wow, I don't have to get as close to my microphone. And I'm like, no, it's not invented so you can have bad mic technique. That's horrible. They're like, it's so loud, I can talk from back here. And I'm like, yeah, it sounds like you're in a tunnel now. Don't do that. So
it drives me crazy, Dave. On Monday. I did 4 podcasts. So we recorded 4. One started at 10. I did one at 7 p.m., one at 10 p.m., one at 11 p.m. In all 4 of them, I had to tell guests, where's your microphone? And they were like, oh, it's like, I'm like, grab it, bring it closer to you. And one gal even had a ATR 2100 style mic, and she kept putting it on the end of the table. And yeah, she was pointing it at herself, but I was like, no, I want that. Bring it closer. There is a little bit, I think, for some people, there's the fear in these things. Like they're like, it's like they're somehow infested with COVID. Like you're like, no, don't get it too close to me. You're like, no, get it. Bring that thing up. Get it closer. For sure.
When I run the sound system at my church and somebody has to sing a solo, I always have to tell them the microphone is your friend. Like sing
get in there.
And they're like, well, and I'm like, no, I'm like, you're not Christina Aguilera where your voice.
Hold it. They try to hold it down here, and you're like, come on, down at their chest, and you're like,
and I'm like, look, you've practiced this song for months. Like, let's let people actually listen to you sing. Mm-hmm. Kevin says, does the RE20 need one?
A cloud lifter or
technically no. And here's one of those lovely podcasting, it depends kind of answers. It depends on what you're putting it into. Mm-hmm. So if you're putting it into a Rodecaster or a Focusrite, probably not, because most of those have good, what is the phrase for that? Preamps. They have good preamps to where you can turn it up. It can really, crank the volume without introducing a bunch of hiss. And then, and that's what Mark is saying here. What preamp interface are you currently using without the cloud lifter? So, and this may be sometimes, try it. Don't spend money on stuff you don't need. So if you've got an RE20, plug it into whatever interface you're doing and hit record and then listen. Because just because somebody said, oh, you need that, again, if it's coming from Facebook, it may not that all Facebook advice is bad. I offer a lot of advice on Facebook, but there are times when people, I don't think, read the question. And
they just have their own opinion too. Yeah. Their own experience. The room that you're in may matter. I would say try to go minimum until the point where, so get it pick it up, and if you need to, take care of the packaging and return it if you don't need it. It may be just one of those things you need to try it out in your environment. Last September, October, when I went to Boston to see Ed, Ed owns every piece of sound gear that's ever been made. So we just spent a morning going through different. This is how I kind of landed on the Motu. Mm-hmm. We just went through and recorded me going through every mic and every interface, and we recorded it, and then we went back, we talked about it, and we went back and played them. How does this sound? How does that sound? This is going to sound pretty good. And this was the kind of this right setup for the price. Could I have spent more? Can I get a Heil PR40? Could I get an RE20? Sure. Do I want to be in that $400 to $500 to $600 price range for a microphone? No, I do average guy stuff. And so I try to say, I'm getting by on the average guy stuff, right? And the Mo2 is 170, which is a little more expensive than some of the other interfaces, but that was really, really helpful. So if you can, just, especially if you're in a big city and you live in local, there's a Guitar Center or some of those kinds of things nearby where you can kind of try it out. And then if it doesn't work, take it back.
And the other thing too is I see so many people that think if I buy this piece of equipment, it will somehow equate to more downloads. And I don't think that is a line that is drawn straight. What it might do is make you more comfortable behind the mic, which might make your content a little better, which might lead to more downloads. But most of the time, this equipment leads more download. No. And if you're happy with the way you sound, and when people hit play, they don't hear before they hear you talk, then you're probably fine. And Mark is a giant audio nerd. He's the guy at Podcast Movement that had the booth with like 27 microphones. He says a properly working RE20 should not need a cloud lifter if your preamp interface has a decent amount of gain. Focusrite, DBX286, the Apollo Twin. He's got a bunch of these. Any of those should be fine. So yeah. So it's one of those things where, again, I think we can get distracted by the technology. Let's get back to what does my audience want and give that to them. So
well, and I think if you're going to get deep into the technical or the technicalities, the technical parts of podcasting, like with a microphone, I don't think it's a bad idea to get a couple folks that you trust and just have a conversation. Don't do it on Facebook. Call them, have a conversation, work this thing around, do it for yourself. Because and you can have it on Facebook if you want, but I think it's a great opportunity. Just kind of work it through. Get what I'm not, Dave. I'm not going to question my audio setup for a long time. I'm just like, it works. I'm not thinking like, oh man, if I ran some processing on this thing, maybe I could get. No, those days are over for me for now. And maybe there'll be a day, when I've got an extra $1,000 to spend, maybe I'll upgrade. But that day is not today. That's
freedom. To go focus on your content, your family. It's like, it's check it off the list and move on. Mm-hmm. Diane says, I'm thinking of doing a podcast on commercials. Funny, heart kind of touching. I know I can't play the ads, but could I put the YouTube link in the show notes? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because you're not playing it on the show. You could, and that's a great example of how do I get people to my website so they'll buy my product or donate or something, and just say, oh, I've just given you the history of this commercial and I explained it. All you have to do, if you want to see that commercial, I've got a link to it on YouTube. Just go out to the website, mywebsite.com/27, and that's where you'll see the link to that and you can watch it. So, Kevin says, oh, wait a minute. If we're going to talk about
here we
this,
go.
I
here
know,
we go. I like it.
It's getting teed up here. Oh, wait a minute. I can't find it. It's in here.
Can you find it?
Oh, wait, I got it.
All right.
And now, he's been waiting for this. It's time for Jim to get his nerd on.
That's it. Kevin in the chat room has asked the question, is a Mac or Windows PC better, the better way to go for a small home podcast studio?
Well, it kind of depends. First, what are you most familiar with? I know a lot of people focus on the technology first, but your productivity with the equipment is way more important than any of the technology itself. What are you most productive? So what do you know the best? If you're a Mac guy, well, then probably a Mac is going to be best. And there's some, even though Mac is more expensive, there's some easy ways. I have a Mac Mini, the M1. I'd wait for the M2, by the way, but you could go that route. It's not terribly. We're talking like $1,000 for a PC probably to get you in that. The Windows side can be more. You have more options, but it also can be more confusing and also can be worse. So listen, $1,000 Windows computer and $1,000 Mac computer, they're basically the same thing. Like there's not that much difference between the two of them. The question is, how much do you want to pay? If your budget, if you only have $500 and that's all I can spend on it, well, then you're going to go Windows, and that's just what you're going to take. And There's a few things you can do to make sure you're getting a pretty good deal, but it's not. This isn't an area where it's rocket science. You get what you pay for, and so if you're going in, so start with your what are you best at? I mean, what do you know the tools on? That would be my first, and then two, what's your budget at that point? Windows is going through some. Just here, Can I nerd out for one more?
Oh yeah.
For one more second, I think.
And now, oh, he's been waiting for this. It's time for Jim to get his nerd on.
Yes. Big announcements by Microsoft for Windows 11, which is coming. They said at one point they didn't think they were going to do this, but they did. It'll be out in the Insider Preview channel here in the next week or two. Probably generally available towards the end of the year. Is like Windows 11 going to bring you things you can update on and such? I wouldn't worry about. Not today. So if you're a Windows 10 user, you can still continue to stay on Windows 10. I think it'll be supported till 2025. If you want to upgrade, you can. It's really not that much different in some of the things I've seen. We're a long ways away from you having to make a decision. So if you're hearing these rumblings about Windows 11 and you're like, oh, do I have to upgrade? No, don't. At this point, if you have a good studio setup and you like it, just keep it for now. That's one of those things, Dave. People keep jumping to the next thing when they don't need to. For most people, it's just not going to be a need.
That's it. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Jim Collison, nerding out like nobody can. You got to love it. I had another question I pulled from, I thought this was interesting, from Facebook. This again was from the Podcast Movement group. This is from Isaac. He said, does anyone operate multiple podcasts? I have a political comedy podcast. There's two words you don't hear. Well, I guess it's kind of like.
I think today politics is comedy. It's
exactly.
Entertainment. Jeez.
Yeah. I have a political comedy podcast, but I'm thinking of starting an NFL fantasy football podcast for next season. In addition, do you have any advice? And I was like, because part of me was like, well, there's the two things. Number one, podcasts are like Lay's potato chips. It's hard to have just one, because once you get through that original learning curve, you're like, oh, well, these are easy. It's not that big a deal. So you start the second one, in some cases the third and the fourth. And the problem is, as we kind of mentioned earlier, it's not just creating the content. It's getting people to listen to it, which means you have to go out and market it. And that takes time. And that's where it's like, just because you added a second podcast doesn't mean days now last 48 hours. The other thing, to me, sports podcasts are, I always say, making a good podcast, making a podcast is not hard. Making a good podcast takes some time and effort and thought. When you get into sports podcasts, that's one that I'm like, man, you really have to have a ton of passion, because your competition is ESPN. And they are fully embracing podcasting. So when I want to start an NFL fantasy podcast, I was like, football, whatever, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, but you can get hyper specific in that area with your group, your league. Talk about the things you're doing. I think there's some creative things you can do with that ESPN won't do. Remember, the bigger the network, the more safe they have to be. Right? That's
a good point.
They're not going to take a lot of chances. And so if you're independent and you're doing this thing hobbyist, you can take some real chances and do some really interesting things that those guys and gals can't do. And so I don't, just because there's a ton of people in the space doesn't mean you should. I'm in the tech space, and there's tons of tech podcasts. And yet I get the same 600 people who download my podcast, and the same 10 people who join me live on Thursday nights, right? So just like our audience here, Dave, there's plenty of podcasts about podcasting. People like to come here on Saturday mornings. So this is why we keep doing it.
Well, that's it. And that was my weird thing, because I'm like, wait, am I hinting that this guy shouldn't have a podcast? And I was like, no, but he should have. Number one, if you're just doing it for fun and you want to, maybe it'd be a cool way to communicate with everybody in your league. That would be fun. I think I'd be like, what are the expectations for this podcast? Because if you're like, we want to be the number one sports podcast, I'm like, that's not going to happen in a season. So
it could. I mean,
it could.
You could hit something big.
Yeah.
I guarantee you this: if you don't try, you won't get there.
See, that's it.
I can guarantee that, right? So
Yeah.
you got to try. It's like anything else in life. The odds are pretty slim, right? But don't get discouraged if
Right.
you don't. Just keep going. This is where it goes back to Dave. If you don't like doing it,
Yeah.
you should stop.
Yeah.
Like, because at the end of the day, I mean, again, I get nothing from this podcast except enjoyment. You're not paying me. I've been meaning to talk to you about that, but you're not paying me. I don't, there's just really not. But the value of the community and hanging out with you and being here is so great. Why would I stop? Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where you want to be. If you're going to start a second one, you have to ask yourself the question: one, am I doing a second one to avoid the first one? And two, am I getting enjoyment out of this? Because if you're not, don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coach Dave says people often think his show is a sports podcast, but it's really about helping parents and coaches maximize the youth sports experience for age-appropriate development and life lessons. So, yeah, a whole lot more than well, that's really, for me, when you get your kids into sports, you want them to learn much more than how to hit a ball or kick a ball or whatever they're doing, because it's about teamwork, it's about dedication, it's about practice, it's about, things like that. So,
This is a
fun.
great question. This is a great question.
What's your take on a regional, local, or even a hyper-local podcast? It's funny because somebody asked a question in Facebook that said, I have a weekly local podcast. It covers arts, music, events, local history, and interview segments with a local creative or business person. So I'm not really attempting to achieve world domination. I'm trying to build a more local or regional following. On average, my podcast averages about 200 downloads a month, which again, I say, if you're really trying to tell people how many downloads you get, I get this many downloads per episode. But I realize that is, to a certain extent, pulling down your pants. But yeah, I think they're great. I love the idea. If I had not had, right now I think I have 4 or 5 podcasts. And if I didn't, I would be I have the website, akronpodcast.com. I've tried it a couple times. Again, not enough time in the day to really do that the way I want to do it. But some of the things I would do that I don't see people doing, or when I say that, they go, oh, that's a good idea. You can go to something like Sticker Mule and get like these glass, it's a decal that sticks on a window, so it's not permanent.
Yeah, that like it's got a static charge on it. But
yeah. And you could have it put on their windows, like as seen on the blah 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 podcast, and then your website. When we have a local ice cream place here by my house, and I live in Akron, Ohio. Cleveland is the big city, and I remember PM Magazine came on and they interviewed people about Strickland's ice cream, and there was it's probably still a sticker on their window. It's like as seen on PM Magazine, because that was a big deal. But it's just a way to do that, and then work with the businesses you're interviewing. Put business cards or something by the checkout counter. Somehow get them to help promote their appearance. I don't know, Jim. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, throw Randy's comment in there really quick. Yeah. Randy Cantrell jumped in there and says, after years of podcasting, I started a hyper local podcast 30 days ago, and nothing I've ever done before has gained traction so fast. Right. And it can, right. I mean, and I think, with the market being limited, is it limited though? I mean, there's a Forgotten Omaha group on Facebook that's got like 80,000 members in it. And many of them don't even live here. And it's just talking about Omaha. So you may gather, in some big metros, you may be able to gather an audience that has moved away, but they want to hear what's going on locally, right? So it could have some potential.
That's the key. We have a radio station here, the Talk of Akron, WNIR, and it's hilarious because it's people that are on the phone. And it used to be, again, like the mayor said so-and-so, but a lot of it's just like, I hate the left, they're stupid. And then the next person, they're right. A lot of that going on. But it's the Talk of Akron, and they're now on the internet. They're streaming it. I've tried to talk them into making a podcast, and they're like, a what?
Who?
Yeah.
Does anybody listen to those?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have an 800 number. And people like, oh, well, I live in Utah now, but I grew up in Akron. Oh, I'm in Florida now, but I grew up in Akron. So it's people listening to Akron news, even though they don't live in Akron anymore. And the host was phenomenal. His name was Howie Chiswick. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple of years, and it's just not the same without that guy, because he was kind of a Jon Stewart-ish, where it was like sarcastic and not afraid to say the truth, and knew how to push people's buttons and really got people riled up without being obnoxious. It was really, really cool.
Look, I think as we wrap this up for the recorded part this morning, I think it's always about you, right?
Yeah.
It's really never about the content. I mean, you got to have some content and thing, but it's really about your personality and what you're bringing into this. So don't forget that. People listen to you. The content is just an excuse. So, if you can line up you and the content together, you've got a dynamite formula. So make sure you remember you are the one, as you're speaking, you're the one they're coming for.
Yeah. Well, speaking of coming for you, people that are coming for you, Jim, what are they going to find over at theaverageguy.tv?
John Panazzo from Unraid is on. And so if you want to get your storage geek on, right, if you want to talk about hard drives and storage space and RAID and ZSFS and all that other great stuff, I'll be posting that a little bit later over here at theaverageguy.tv.
And on the School of Podcasting, I interviewed Adam Curry a couple weeks ago and got more feedback than I have. Not that I don't get feedback, but I mean, I got like considerably more feedback. And I went back to those people and said, okay, you said you liked it. Why did you like it? And there were a couple themes that went through there. And so I'm going to share those along with a really interesting Because of My Podcast story. And that will be over, as always, at the School of Podcasting.com. I want to thank, of course, our sponsor, good old podcastbranding.co. Want to thank the Teacher's Pet, the Dog Podcast Network. Want to thank all the 20 people still out in the chat room here on a holiday weekend. We do appreciate you coming here every Saturday. You can be an awesome supporter at askthepodcastcoach.com/store. And again, you can find Jim at theaverageguy.tv. You can find me at schoolofpodcasting.com. And I said all of this way too fast. And because
the 29, you look at it, you got 29 seconds, and you're like, what do I say?
Yes, I have 5 seconds to kill here. So we were here next week. We're here every week. AskThePodcastCoach.com/live.